Hello, and welcome to Phenomenon Radio, the show that covers thought-provoking breakthroughs in the fields of UAP UFOs to discover fascinating truths, first-hand accounts, and investigative insights into the expanding confluence of physical and mental exposure to this worldwide phenomenon. Hosted by world-renowned experiencer of the 1980 Rendlesham Bentwaters UFO incident, John Burroughs, and Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist Linda Moulton Howe. And now, leading off the program, here's Linda Moulton Howe.
10 years ago, in 2005, a book was released entitled Hunt for the Skinwalker. The book was written by biochemist Colm Kelleher, PhD, and George Knapp, multiple Emmy Award-winning investigative reporter at KLAS-TV, the CBS affiliate in Las Vegas. Their book is about a ranch in northeastern Utah, 150 miles southeast of Salt Lake City. In 1994, Terry Sherman, his wife Gwen, and their children moved onto a 480-acre ranch a few miles south of Fort Duchesne. Soon, they discovered mysterious circles in their pasture grass and missing and mutilated cattle. Then came box-shaped UFOs emitting what looked like laser beams, other mysterious lights, Bigfoot, shadow creatures, even a wolf that could not be shot and killed. That's why Skinwalker is in the book title and why it came to be known as the Skinwalker Ranch. Skinwalker is what the Navajo and other American Indian tribes call otherworldly beings that can shapeshift, take the form of many different matter bodies, while tricking humans into thinking they are powerful Earth creatures. The persistent Skinwalker phenomena on the ranch became a 7-year-long scientific investigation from 1996 to 2003 by Robert Bigelow's National Institute of Discovery Science, known as NIDS, that is now closed down. That Skinwalker phenomena opens the book with a light blue-eyed wolf that walked calmly towards the family, even allowed the humans to pet its fur right before the big wolf attacked a nearby calf. Terry Sherman shot straight into the wolf's chest and stomach with a .357 Magnum. To his shock, quote, the huge beast stood about 10 feet away but displayed no signs of discomfort after being shot 4 times at point-blank range, close quote. Terry Sherman then got his .30-06 rifle and shot the wolf. Quote, the rifle bullet ripped through the animal and a sizable chunk of flesh detached from the exit wound, but the wolf made no sound and did not bleed. The wolf slowly ran away, leaving deep tracks in muddy ground until the tracks stopped abruptly. It was as if the big wolf had vanished into thin air, close quote. On a July 24, 2015 web radio broadcast of Bigger Picture with Ron James, George Knapp emphasized that serious scientists tried to study that Skinwalker Ranch phenomena, but they kept feeling like they were the ones under observation, manipulated by the alien intelligence.
These are legitimate PhD-level scientists who have no preconceptions about what was going on there. They just studied it because they wanted to find out. And they had these experiences themselves. They saw these things, creatures, UFOs, mutilations. That's the strangest part of the whole thing. It's clearly not coyotes. Bobcats aren't doing this. Something is using surgical precision instruments, metallic instruments. The NIDS team on the Utah ranch proved that. They did necropsies on these animals, a couple of them, and it's clear that heavy instruments were used to cut through the flesh, and then small instruments, metallic instruments, cut the flesh and smash the bones. Somebody did it in broad daylight. Somebody did it without making a sound, without leaving prints, stripped the flesh, 75 pounds of meat in a couple of minutes from an otherwise healthy calf in broad daylight with people out there standing next to it. This suggests a paranormal sort of an explanation. At Skinwalker Ranch, it seemed like that is a location where everything is happening at once. And it's almost as if the phenomena is saying all of this is related somehow. we developed the idea that maybe there are other dimensions, that there are intelligences that can interact with us, that can come into our reality and leave at will. They can see us, they can hear us, they monitor us on a regular basis, but we can't see them.
Terry Sherman, his family, and the scientists all felt that the intelligence behind the highly strange events on the ranch was interacting with them, reacting to them, and manipulating their human minds. Manipulation of human minds by specific frequencies of non-ionizing radiation emitted from unidentified aerial phenomena is what we've talked about in Phenomena Radio the past 2 weeks. We quoted from the UK Ministry of Defense Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Scientific and Technical Report, and it states that the UAP radiation effects on humans are, quote, quick acting and follow the event. There is little or no recall of events as a continuum. In short, the witness often reports an apparent gaps or lost time, often not accounting for up to several hours. It is described as though the exposure causes a temporary memory erasure. It would seem that this effect can occur when close to a UAP or UFO, either outdoors or indoors. This causes the brain to interact in an unusual way with the imagination library, causing reports of visual activity which are not, in fact, a true representation of the facts, close quote. So what exactly was that wolf with the pale blue eyes that took so many bullets without blood or pain? That wolf left deep tracks in the muddy ground until they stopped, as if the wolf had suddenly disappeared from this matter world. Colm Kelleher and George Knapp ended their Skinwalker Ranch book with insights from scientists such as quantum physicist Michio Kaku at New York University in Manhattan, who says, quote, "We physicists no longer believe in a single universe. We physicists believe in a multiverse that resembles the boiling of water. Water boils when tiny particles or bubbles form, which then begin to rapidly expand. If our universe is a bubble in a boiling water, then perhaps big bangs happen all the time," close quote. And MIT cosmologist Max Tegmark follows up with, quote, "Scientists have discussed as many as 4 distinct types of parallel universes. The key question is not whether the multiverse exists, but rather how many levels does it have?" Close quote. And are we dealing with other dimensional entities that can pop back and forth between universes and dimensions, or extraterrestrial biological entities that are organic life forms in this universe, but more advanced than humans? After the mysterious RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge phenomena of December 1980 that has haunted Phenomenon Radio host John Burroughs for 35 years, the former Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt said in a June 25, 2009 press release, quote, "I wish to make it perfectly clear that the UFOs that I saw were structured machines moving under intelligent control and operating beyond the realm of anything I have ever seen before or since. I believe the objects that I saw at close quarter were extraterrestrial in origin, and that the security services of both the United States and England were and have been complicit in trying to subvert the significance of what occurred at Rendlesham by use of well-practiced methods of disinformation," close quote. After this brief commercial break, Emmy Award-winning investigative reporter George Knapp from KLAS-TV in Las Vegas will join Phenomenon Radio host John Burroughs and me to discuss the UK and Utah phenomena that provoke questions about time travelers, intersecting timelines, other dimensions, multiple and parallel universes, wormhole shortcuts through the cosmos, and our human confusion about what are they and why are they here, and can the government stop lying and tell us all the truth about an alien presence that persists on planet Earth.
We'll be right back with tonight's very special guest, George Knapp, right after these short messages.
Alternative talk you can trust. The X.
Welcome back to Phenomenon Radio. Here's John Burroughs.
Thank you, Race. George, first of all, I'd like to start out by saying thanks for taking some time out of your busy schedule to come on with us tonight.
Good to be here, John and Linda.
I'd like to start with when we've talked about the ranch. You talk about guys, you call them scientists with PhDs. I'd like you to start out by maybe going in a little bit about who these guys were, what their backgrounds were, what Mr. Bigelow was looking for when he hired these guys and put them on the ranch, and after their 7-year investigation, what conclusions they came up with.
Bob Bigelow has probably spent more money on the study of UFOs and the paranormal than any person in the history of the world. I mean, it's millions of dollars that he would dole out to people he considered to be reputable researchers to fund particular projects. Sometimes he offered money to the UFO organizations. I think he offered a big pile of money if they could somehow learn to get along. Because he's interested. I mean, it really doesn't extend much beyond that. He has an ongoing interest. He's had some experiences in his life and his family's life, and he was always curious about what the ultimate answers were. So he was unsatisfied with the work that was being done with the main UFO organizations, private researchers, and so he tried to fund his own. And he set up something called the National Institute for Discovery Science. He recruited top-level PhD folks who had exhibited an interest in these kinds of topics, not just UFOs, but related subjects, exotic topics, things that may or may not go together, but people with open minds who were willing to follow the evidence wherever it leads. So he put together a world-class science advisory board that would advise him on how to go about this kind of research. He also had, for a time, a rapid response team that would jump on a plane, travel to this state or that state whenever they get a report about a rash of cattle mutilations or a UFO flap, and they'd be boots on the ground to try to investigate it. He tried to put together a massive database of his own so that he could get answers. So when the stories started filtering in about this ranch in Utah where a whole bunch of strange stuff had happened, there was a little tiny article in the paper that Terry Sherman, the rancher, had reached out to a local reporter in the belief that all these strange things that were happening on his ranch might be the result of the government, that they were trying to drive him off his property. So he figured, well, if I get some publicity, maybe they'll stop it. So he allowed a story to be written about a tiny little sliver of the strange stuff that had happened on his property. The story that made the paper, that first one, was something had slipped into the ranch. There was only one road in, one road out, and it goes right by the house where he and his family lived. Anybody comes into the property, they would see him. But somebody came into the property and used like a giant cookie cutter to take huge chunks of soil, hundreds and hundreds of pounds of soil in these intricate designs out of the ground. And how they'd need heavy equipment. They'd need some cranes. I don't know how they would do it, and certainly I don't know how they would do it without him noticing it, but they did it. So he allowed a picture to be taken. The story was picked up by the Associated Press. Bob Bigelow read it and flew up to meet him. And then that's when he heard this litany of stories that had not been made public, weren't made public until we did the book years later, about all the strange activity that had gone on there, and Bigelow talked him into selling the property. By that point, the Sherman family had been on the ranch for 20 months, and they were messed up. I mean, this thing really took a toll on them, not only financially by destroying so many of their prized and valuable animals, but just mentally wore them down. When the NIDS team arrived on the ranch, the Shermans, Terry, his wife, and his 2 kids were all sleeping in one room on the floor at night for safety, because this thing had scared the heck out of them in so many different ways. It played with their minds, had really made them question reality. Bigelow bought the property. He talked Terry Sherman into staying on, strangely enough, as the ranch manager. The family moved. So they didn't really know what they had, but they entered it with an open mind, as good scientists should do. Hey, let's get to the bottom of this and figure it out. And they started looking for prosaic explanations. They did... They searched for gravity anomalies. They did a survey of all the plant and animal life on the property, thinking maybe it's something, psychoactive plants that are causing hallucinations. They interviewed neighbors. They started interviewing townspeople. They tried to talk to the tribe. and extended a further and further net out. And the more they talked to people, the stranger the story got, because they learned that strange things had been going on in the Uinta Basin for as long as humans had lived there. Back to the time when the first Spanish explorers came through, as long as Native Americans had been there. This particular property that Linda described, the 480 acres, is completely surrounded by the Ute Reservation, the Uinta, the Orane Reservation. And the Utes, strangely enough, tell their members, don't go on this ranch. They say it's in the path of the Skinwalker. And when the first time I heard that phrase, I kind of got a chill. The hair on my arm raised up. I said, wait, what, Skinwalker? Because although I had been privy to the reports that Bigelow had been filing for a couple of years, I was sworn to secrecy. I'd never heard that term, and I don't think they had either. But the guy who told it to us said, yeah, the Utes believe this is where the Skinwalker, it's where he lives or hangs out, or the path that he uses up on this ridge, so we don't go there. It's sort of like there's a curse on this land. And so anyway, they started casting a wide net to try to figure it out. I don't think they ever found out any answers, which is, I get a lot of complaints over the years about why all the secrecy. It's because they, what were they supposed to say? Nothing ever happened the same. There were more than 140 incidents during the time that they were there that they investigated. All of them were different. Nothing ever repeated. They'd put a camera into an area where there'd been a lot of activity, and the activity would move. It always seemed to stay one step ahead of them. In fact, an interview I did with Bob, the first interview he ever did on a television camera, we talked about the ranch, and he shared with me his belief that this was a display of some sort, that in the end, it was some kind of a display or performance, that this intelligence that was operating there, and there's no question is intelligent, was sort of leading us down a path, whether it was a learning curve or trying to tell us that all these different kind of phenomena that we have classified as paranormal are related in some way, that reality itself is a much bigger, more mysterious, and more wondrous construct than we can imagine. Seem to be suggesting that we need to start thinking out of the box, and it certainly worked in that regard. But in terms of answers about what it is, there aren't any.
And George, I have in front of me a September 6th, 2004. This was a report that I did going back to an interview that I had done with Terry Sherman. And that date was in June of 1996. It was recorded, and it was then, I think, when Art Bell was doing Coast. And in that interview with Terry Sherman in June of 1996, he was talking to me about all of this phenomena that was happening on his ranch, because a friend of his had gotten in touch with me because I was doing Coast. And here is the part. He was talking about one night where those orange lights that through his hunting scope, he could see a spiral come over the orange lights, 4 of them, in something that seemed so huge that it might have been 900 feet wide, but he could never see the shape of what contained these orange. He said it could be holes, could be windows, could be doors. He never knew, but he could see through the hunting scope spirals that would come over the orange, and it would go black, and then it would spiral back, and he could see inside of these holes. And he went down closer into the pasture with his hunting scope, and he could see 2 men. And this is what he told me. 2 men were arguing inside. Suddenly, he thought that he could hear their voices and had the impression that some part of him was suddenly inside the craft briefly where the 2 men were arguing. And he could see himself down on the ground as well below the craft, as if he were in 2 places at once. That's very common in the human abduction syndrome to hear that description. And then he was back on the ground looking up through one of these lighted reddish-orange holes where the 2 men were, and he could hear telepathically in his head, quote, "It would not do any good if we tried to explain to him, because he would never understand what we are doing here," close quote. And when Terry Sherman told me that was the closest that he'd ever gotten, and the description One was a large humanoid. The other falls into the category of what we might call either a tall, thin, blonde, or some kind of non-human. It made me wonder, did you and any of the group in the 7-year research ever get any more details about different types being seen by the scientists, by the Shermans, by anyone on that ranch?
Oh, quite a few reports, not only from the scientists who were there, from the Sherman family that lived there, from the neighbors who had seen this kind of stuff. There are different categories. There's the creature reports. There was one incident that happened with, the wolf. I want to go back to the wolf for a second. You told that story, Linda, at the beginning of the program. I should add that after the NIDS folks came onto the property and heard that story from the Shermans, they did a little sort of like a photo lineup, as police might do, with different kinds of wolves, and they showed it to the family. And all the family members picked out the one that looked most like the one that had appeared there with the bulletproof qualities. And the wolf that they picked was a dire wolf, which went extinct about 10,000 years ago. The fur that you mentioned that flew off of this beast when the rancher made his sixth and final shot, when he came back from the mud pit where this thing disappeared into thin air, he picked it up. I suppose if he had held on to that sample, we'd have some more answers now, but he didn't. I mean, he's not an investigator. That was what happened on the first day that the family moved onto the property. But he said that fur, that flesh, smelled like rotten meat, as if it had been out in the sun for a couple of weeks or at least days. There were other creatures that were seen both before, during, and after the NIDS team was there. One that looked like a huge muscular hyena with a big furry tail that was slashing at the hooves of the horses when the rancher and his wife came back from town. He jumps out, yells at it, and it runs away up towards Skinwalker Ridge and jumps and poof, just goes like into thin air, goes away. The horse's hooves and legs were scratched up as if this thing had been playing with it. There was a creature, after a very dramatic calf mutilation that happened in broad daylight, that you made reference to in the introduction. The rancher and his wife are tagging the ears of newborn calves. The first one they come to is about 50 yards away from the ranch house, and they go on about on the pasture. They're another 100 yards away or so, and they hear the mother cow making a whole bunch of noise. They look back, and she's dragging her leg and going around in circles, her eyes bugging out. They rush back over, and they see that the calf that they had just tagged a short time before is completely stripped of flesh. Completely stripped. It's one of its legs pulled out and thrown almost in ritualistic fashion. No blood on the ground. Just nothing left there but skin and bone. They did some analysis. They had a team come in and took samples, sent it to independent labs, and determined that whatever had done this in broad daylight, right there with the rancher and his wife in the pasture, had used very sharp instruments. One was a heavy machete-like instrument, the other like a scalpel. And they had done it in broad daylight and were undetected. Now, that night, the NIDS team is on the ranch. They're all on high alert. Everybody is, the dogs on the property are hiding. They hear something out among the cows on the pasture. The rancher grabs his gun, jumps in his truck. He's determined not to lose another cow, and he goes barreling across the pasture, jumps out of his truck, shines his light on this tree. He sees a creature. It's almost like a big bear, a big round black bear at the bottom of the tree, and then up in the tree itself are gigantic reptilian eyes. He shoots at the thing at the bottom of the tree, and it goes poof. It just disappears. He hits it. He shoots at the thing in the tree, the eyes, and it, whatever it was, it fell out. And there's a pile of snow, because it happened in the wintertime, or while there was still snow on the ground, and this thing, whatever it was, left a track in the snow. And they looked at it later. They analyzed it. It's like a big raptor, like a dinosaur. So this thing took off into the brush. Terry Sherman goes after it. The NIDS guys in another vehicle come up behind him, and they go after it. They could never find it. There were other creatures. There were two creatures. Colum and I, when we were working on the book, decided that we were not going to hold anything back, that we're going to tell the whole story as we knew it at that time. The only thing that we debated about is this story. because it sounds so preposterous. At the time, at least, it sounded preposterous. Since then, a lot of other reports have come forward which sound very similar. But Native American police officers, 2 guys on patrol right at the dirt road that leads into the ranch, they come around the corner, and there's these 2 figures standing right there smoking cigarettes. They were wearing trench coats, smoking cigarettes, had their back to the headlights where these cops decided to stop, shine their light on them, and they get out to ask these guys what they're doing. The 2 guys in the trench coats turn around, and they're dogs. They're dogs smoking cigarettes. And the cops look at each other, they look back, and poof, the guys are gone. They walked over, they found the cigarettes still burning on the ground, but the guys had vanished right before their eyes. We debated about whether to include that story because people would say it's ridiculous, but now there have been books about dog man sightings all over the place. So, yeah, there were all kinds of creatures that were seen on the ranch. And maybe the most dramatic incident happened when Dr. Kelleher and a fellow PhD were walking the property with dogs. They used dogs as sort of biosensors. One night in the middle homestead, 2 other guys are up on the Skinwalker Ridge with binoculars and infrared sensors looking down on where these guys are walking across the pasture. The guys up top talked to the guys down below, and they said, hey, there's something. You're coming up on something. It looks like a big fuzzy snowball that's glowing, and it's floating off the ground. We can see it. So these guys on the ground, Colum and the other guy, they start seeing it, and this fuzzy snowball that's just floating there in the air starts to expand. And instead of a big ball, it becomes sort of a tunnel. And after a couple of minutes, something started crawling through the tunnel. And they're watching it. The guys up top are saying, hey, are you seeing this? They're getting really nervous. This thing wriggles through the tunnel as if it's coming from another world, another reality. It wriggles all the way through, stands up. It's like 8 feet tall, humanoid figure, completely dark, no features, no facial features or anything. As it stands up, this thing that had been a tunnel collapses back onto a ball and eventually disappears. And the creature, whatever it was, starts running up toward the Skinwalker Ridge. Well, the guys who were up there panicked. They said, we're getting the hell out of here. So they rushed down the other way. And that was a close encounter with something. They also had encounters with something that was invisible. There were many times on the property that the rancher would report that something was walking in between his cattle. It would scatter the herds. Sometimes it would walk through water on the property, and you could hear it. You could see the water moving. You could hear the water dripping off of whatever it was when it got out of the water, but it was invisible. So there was a whole plethora of strange creature sightings on the property. And you know what? There's no telling what these things really looked like. It took different appearances, different forms at different times to different people. And perhaps it could take different forms like a skinwalker. Perhaps it could manipulate minds to make it look like in our brains it looked like something else. Or perhaps it could do both.
And George, it seems to me this goes a bit to the heart of both the parallel with R.A.F. Bentwaters and the Skinwalker Ranch phenomena in this regard. Jim Penniston thought, based on his experience December 26, 1980, that they were dealing with time travelers who had some sort of a survival problem. In your chapter in the book called The Window, there is this description that we're talking about the Sherman Ranch. The homestead was the only vantage point from which this orange tunnel structure was perfectly visible. It was like a 3-dimensional orange tunnel that receded away from them, meaning the house, and the sides of the tunnel were perfectly camouflaged with the sky. So from a side view, an observer could see nothing at all. The only perspective that afforded a good view into the interior of this bizarre orange tunnel was directly opposite the house. And what I wonder is that in these phenomena that we are trying to understand that must be related to technologies like the UAP scientific and technical report that John and I and others have been studying, that if we are dealing with an advanced intelligence that has learned how to use, whether it's wormholes or technology of certain frequencies and radiations that can literally connect some part of the cosmos right to a spot on Earth and can come and go for reasons that are still unknown, the same kind of technology would perhaps be what was used in RAF Bentwaters.
Well, there are some distinct similarities. As you mentioned, Terry Sherman, that's not the name we used in the book, but we had our own reasons for that. The rancher had reported seeing this big orange hole in the sky, and that's how he described it to the NIDS guys, as a hole in the sky. He said that it was another sky on the other side, that it was, whatever the world was on the other side of this hole, it would be twilight where he was and blue sky in the afternoon wherever the other side was. And on occasion, he would see things flying in and out, craft that would come in and out. So it sure sounds like a portal to me. The description of that creature that Colum and others had seen wriggling through that tunnel of light, that certainly sounds like it's coming from somewhere else. Ultimately, that's sort of where we were left. It seems like there was an intelligence that was operating that assumed different shapes and forms that could manipulate minds, could certainly affect the fear center in human brains, and I can give you some examples of that. It could interact with us, enter our reality anytime it wanted, do whatever it wanted, manipulate space and time and objects in ways that we don't understand, and we can't do anything about it. And that was, there were certain social dynamics on the ranch. While the rancher was there being terrorized, this thing seemed to feed off of fear. It kind of got a kick out of it. It enjoyed seemingly toying with the family and messing with their heads. When the NIDS guys got on the property and started setting up cameras and going out to actively seek this thing out, the social dynamics changed. It played games for a while, and there was a time when they thought they were going to make communication with it. They actively attempted to communicate in some really creative experiments, and then the thing got nasty. And it did a couple of very distinct and direct incidents that made it clear that it was unhappy, that it didn't like being stalked, and then it went underground altogether. It just stopped happening, as if it took its marbles and went home. It didn't like playing this game anymore.
And back to what Terry Sherman told me back in June of 1999, quoting again just to remind that the two men, he could hear them say, but Terry Sherman knew when he talked to me, it was in his mind. He was hearing this telepathically. Quote, "It would not do any good if we tried to explain to him because he would never understand what we are doing." Quote, close quote. And in the RAF Bentwaters side, the idea that Peniston, from a hypnosis, gained at least an insight. He thought that what had come to Rendlesham was something that was time traveling because it had some kind of a survival problem. And he used the term that it was harvesting genetic material from our planet to use, quote, as Band-Aids 40,000 years in the future. And that whole issue of time travel, it provokes me to think, as you described, that there might be a wolf that is 12,000 years old, reptilians that might be millions of years old. Are we dealing with that tube, that pipe, that whatever you want to call it, that could be seen from the front of the Sherman's ranch house? That was the space-time portal, and that these beings were dealing with creatures that were crossing timelines in millions of years?
Well, I have to ask whether it could be both technological and natural. Some of the incidents that were reported on the ranch seemed distinctly technological. The Shermans had been seeing these balls of light, these orbs, blue. First it was white orbs that would pop around. Then it was these red orbs that seemed specifically designed to scare livestock. And then the blue orbs that would fly around. They look like a little bit bigger than a softball, made out of glass with a bubbling blue liquid inside. Now, if we've got some technology like that, and we had it in the mid-'90s, I'd like to know where it is, because that would be kind of handy to know how to make a ball of glass filled with blue liquid fly. And whenever these blue things would get near the family, it triggered the pain, the fear center in their brains would just drive them to their knees. And by that point, they had been kind of used to being scared out there. They were used to dealing with the strange phenomena. But this thing was way beyond any kind of fear that was natural. So that seemed technological. Some of the other things that happened seemed technological. They had but also just mean. If Terry Sherman, if he heard it right, it's absolutely correct that he wouldn't understand, because nobody understands the childish pranks that were played just out of meanness. For example, Sherman and his wife, they had lost a bunch of livestock. Some just disappeared into thin air. Some had been carved up in the kind of mutilations that you've been following and investigating for a long time, Linda. And he says to his wife, as they're driving to town to buy groceries, he said, look, there's our 4 bulls, our 4 prized bulls right there in the corral, big, strong, expensive animals. If something happens to them, we'll have to go under. They drive to town. They come back a half an hour later. The bulls are gone, and they panic. They start jumping around, looking all over. How could they possibly get out? In the middle of the corral is this white a metal trailer that he used as a storage shed for tools and other property. There's only one door into it, and it's secured by a big, thick bale of wire. The wire's still there. The door hasn't been opened. But he figures, what the heck, I'll peek into this grate and see if, for some reason, the bulls are in here. And sure enough, there they were. All 4 of these giant 2,000-pound bulls crammed into this trailer. There is no way you could spend all day at a forklift and you couldn't get one of those bulls into that trailer without sedating them. Here is all 4 of them are crammed into the trailer like sardines. When he yells to his wife, hey, I found them, they're in here, the bulls wake up as if out of a trance and start kicking the sides of this trailer, knocked it out, and then they got out. When the NIDS guys got to the property, they had been gone back to Las Vegas for the weekend. They fly back after that incident and start investigating. They found that all the metal grates of the metal bars of this corral where the bulls had disappeared had been magnetized. That's a technology. At the same time that we can point to incidents like that where there is technology involved, you have to wonder if there also is some sort of a natural portal or some kind of an opening to another reality that we don't quite understand. Because all kinds of things would pop up on the ranch that just didn't make any sense. Different animals like birds, these red tropical birds that would appear out of nowhere that just didn't belong there. They'd never been seen there. They looked like they belong at home in the Amazon jungle. Or there would be, flocks of geese that would fly over the property. You'd see them over the ranch house, and bam, somewhere right over the ranch house, they'd run into something invisible that would scatter them all over the place, like a big invisible wall of some sort. There were other creatures that came in and out that had seemingly had nothing to do with the intelligence that was torturing and tormenting the ranch family and playing with the minds of the NIDS guys. It was almost like they incidentally ended up on the property. We ended up with no answers. It's frustrating to ultimately say that science tried to investigate the paranormal and got its butt kicked, but that's what happened.
And this whole issue of magnetic field focus and the impacts that it might have on the environment, we all know about the Philadelphia experiment, as controversial as it is, but I have talked with a person who had firsthand knowledge from somebody in the Pentagon that one of the men on a ship ended up embedded in a brick wall in Italy based on what we were doing with an experimentation of magnetic fields back then in the 30s on that ship. And in RAF Bantwater's Rendlesham, when John and I were there working with Ancient Aliens in production, one of the women in the town had heard that we were there, and I got to talk with her. And her story was that the night between the December 26th and 28th, that she had firsthand experience about this site in the forest. It's a long story, but it led to her hearing from some workmen who asked what happened to the house that was on a specific road. And she said she went and drove herself, and the house had disappeared after the December 26th to 28th phenomena. John, can you share with George a little bit more about what you have learned about that, and in the context of this whole issue of what kind of technologies are we dealing with?
Well, I mean, she was taken out in the force by Colonel Hall to look at the area, and he was trying to understand through another lady who had a scientific background what they could have been dealing with. The fact that the house disappeared during that time frame and she had to sign paperwork saying, I believe that the house was never there in the first place is interesting. That area was full of, technology that was being worked on in the early phases, radars and everything else. But there's also been a strong presence from way back before our incidents going forward to today of something being present. So, I mean, in a lot of ways, it does sound like, what you guys were dealing with up at Skinwalker. And I'd like to follow up with the question, because we don't really know who got called in out to investigate this afterwards. There was a team brought in, but it seems like you can't really go into the names of the people that did this investigation, but could you at least go into some of their backgrounds and why they came up there? And 7 years is a long time. They had to come up with some kind of conclusions or some kind of ideas of what they were seeing and what it could possibly be, did they not?
They did not. They didn't. And I know, I say that, people say, oh, come on, you're holding it back, but they don't. I mean, it was one of the reasons they kept a lid on it is because they had every intention of eventually publishing it, as NIDS put most of its stuff on its website back in those days, and they had every intention of figuring it out and getting to the bottom of it and making the results public. But what would they publish? Where would they publish it? That nothing ever repeated. Nothing was ever the same. So they were really mystified about it. The science board, I think some of the names have been made public, so I'm not giving anything away here. Jacques Vallée, Dr. Jacques Vallée was one of them. Dr. Hal Puthoff was another. Dr. Kit Green was another. And Colin Kelleher, Dr. Eric Davis, a physicist. They had several other people who have worked for intelligence agencies, other government agencies, universities, people who have sort of put their lives, their professional lives on the line by expressing an interest in these topics. I know because some of them have contacted or contracts at one point or another with CIA or other intelligence folks, it already raises a flag of suspicion. Aha, it's some kind of a big disinformation plot. It couldn't be anything further from the truth. These are people who, while they were working for the government, came across things that piqued their interest. They saw evidence that something was going on, that people somewhere understood this a lot better than we do, and they tried to poke around and find out more about it. And then as civilians, they decided to put their considerable brain power to work in trying to figure it out. And they didn't figure it out. They didn't.
Okay, did they, when you said they tried to communicate with it, can you go into some of the examples of what they did, what kind of equipment they used, and did anything come from it?
Yeah, though at one point it was something pretty similar. They would put things out, and the phenomena would manipulate physical objects. They'd put it out in a very obvious sort of a display to see if they could get a reaction, and they did several times. Different kinds of reactions where this thing would move things around. So they tried blocks. They tried to see if it would communicate through using an alphabet, and that didn't work. I think there were other attempts to communicate with it that I wasn't privy to, but that was the one I know for sure that they tried that didn't go anywhere. They would commune with it. They'd sit out. There were certain things that they would do that could be done that would get it riled up. In fact, the first time I visited, they shared that with me. One of the reasons I was allowed to come onto the property after hearing about it for so long and bugging them about it is because the phenomena had gone underground, and they were hoping that just my inherent weirdness quotient might come on the property and stir things back up. So when I got there the first time I visited, we built the fire out on the property. We danced around and made a bunch of noise. We got an earth mover out. That was supposed to be the thing that really got things going, is to dig, because Terry Sherman, when he bought the property, one of the conditions in the deed was that he wasn't allowed to dig unless he got permission first, which he found odd and quaint, and he went along with it, not thinking it would amount to much of anything. But sure enough, when you dig, things would happen. So we dug it all up, and then they took me and put me on a chair in the middle where that tunnel of light had been and where other things had happened and cattle had been mutilated. They put me on a chair in the dark of night and left me there and put a couple sensors on me and wanted to see if something came and got me. And nothing did. And I would like to tell you that I was, brave and I wasn't scared at all. But I was sitting there thinking to myself, well, look, I'm kind of hoping that I see some UFOs, and it'd be great if some of these orbs would pop up. But I wasn't crazy about seeing one of the predator-type creatures that had been reported coming out and scaring the bejesus out of a visitor to the ranch not long before I was there. But the only thing that came and got me were mosquitoes. These guys wanted to know what was going on the ranch. They devoted 7 years of their lives to it. They visited the property. Bigelow spent millions of dollars on that. I mean, it's expensive, and tried to figure it out and did not get any answers. He did, in the end, as I said to you before, he figured this was some kind of display. They're trying to teach us something. We just haven't figured out what it is they're trying to teach us. He allowed me to write about it primarily because he wanted to see if there were other hot spots, that by publicizing what had happened on the ranch, we might get leads to other hot spots where he could redirect his scientific team and see if they could put him into a different property where similar things had happened and see if they could take a different approach, maybe something less technological. You talk to Bob these days and ask him, would you do it differently? And he said, yeah, maybe we would. And the Science Advisory Board, while all this was going on, had intense debates about the proper approach. Is it a good idea to bring in video cameras and put them on telephone poles and record it 24 hours a day, or to have all kinds of sensor equipment on the property to come in like gangbusters with all kinds of scientific and technical gear, all of which was stymied, all of which would cease functioning at a key time? And the answer is maybe they should have done it differently. Maybe a low-tech approach, maybe with shaman or psychics or remote viewers, something of that sort. If they had a chance to do it again, I think they might try something like that.
Well,
we did find out. I'm sorry. We did find out after the book came out that there were other places like that. Nothing quite as distinct as the activity on the ranch, as multifaceted, but other places in the North America that are similar.
Was it ever brought up? And I'm curious because they try to communicate, they try to film it and everything else. Was there ever discussion to bring in people that may have already had an interaction with them before?
Like abductees?
Yeah.
George, there was that incident with the man who came to meditate, and what happened was astounding. Can you share that?
Yeah, that was sort of what I was referencing, that the place where they put me on the chair is where this guy had his incident. Shortly before the NIDS team got involved, this word started filtering out about the ranch, and somehow this guy heard about it. He showed up at the ranch property one day and wanted to come on. He said he told the rancher that he had been driven there by some force that told him he had to come on the property and meditate. He's a great big guy, looked like Grizzly Adams, big beard, barrel chest. And he kept asking the rancher, who said no, and all right, fine, get in our truck. We'll take you out there. You can meditate for a couple of minutes, but only a couple of minutes. So they get him in the truck. They drive him out to the middle homestead, which is the spot where my chair was set. And he puts his face to the sky and opens his arms, and he's chanting for a couple of minutes, and the rancher and his son are leaning on the pickup looking at him and kind of chuckling to themselves. And suddenly they hear a cowbell noise over in the brush. They hear this cowbell noise. Well, the guy pays no attention to it as he's meditating, but they did, because they don't have any cowbells on their livestock. This thing gets a little bit louder, and then they see something moving through the brush, something big. It was kind of like in the movie Predator, a camouflage, opaque creature moving rapidly through the brush, and they're just about to warn the guy, hey, this thing is coming out of here, just about to say something. It comes out of the brush right up to where this guy's got his eyes closed, and it roars, this lion-type roar. You could have heard it 2 miles away, Terry Sherman had estimated, and this guy freaks out. His eyes open, he flies backward, falls on the ground, and this thing, whatever it was, goes back into the brush and disappears. The rancher goes rushing over to him. The guy's terrified. He grabs onto Terry Sherman, won't let go. Terry Sherman had to, I think, physically threaten him, look, you got to let go of me or else. And then They put him back in the truck, drove him back to the front gate, let him go, and he's screaming at him that the devil was here. This place is cursed. It's the devil. You know, we have heard that a lot since the book came out, that it's the devil, that it's satanic, that it's demons. I can't tell them no. I don't know. We don't know what the answer is. The idea that there should be abductees, that I think it has been discussed, but I don't think it's ever been done. I also can tell you that they did do some attempts to get remote viewers. That Joe McMoneagle is one of the guy who took a look at the ranch. He identified a particular section of the property that he had a really bad vibe about. He didn't know exactly why, but something was underground. We had another team. I had asked a team, Angela Thompson and her remote viewing team, to take a look at it as an exercise. I didn't tell them much about what it was. We did follow the remote viewing protocols, and they came back. Several of them saw underground facilities. They're sensitives. They looked at it. They saw military men underground with banks of equipment looking into monitors. They saw sharpshooters looking through scopes at the property. And there's no question there was military interest during the time the NIDS guys were there. They would fly over in helicopters. They'd see them in trucks. I'm sure that a lot of the communications was monitored after it came clear that they were onto something interesting. And I'm also pretty sure, although I don't want to speak out of turn, that there's been some interest in that level since the study ended, but at a much higher level. But no one has any answers to that. I think your idea about having sensitives on there is something that has merit, but it wasn't tried, to my knowledge, during the 7 years that NIDS was there.
And George, Mr. Sherman, he said that later on, when they saw the movie Predator with Arnold Schwarzenegger, that he and his son, they both said that's what we saw when that meditator was here. And I have had very similar descriptions of the Predator phenomena from men who have served in Vietnam. And when we come back after this break, I would like to ask you if you and any of the scientists ever discussed terahertz frequencies.
Okay.
You're listening to Phenomenon Radio with John Burroughs, Linda Moulton Howe, and tonight's very special guest, George Knapp. We'll be right back to kick off Hour 2 right after these brief messages.
Taking paranormal talk radio to a whole new level. TheUnXNetwork.com.
Welcome back to Phenomenon Radio with Linda Moulton Howe, John Burroughs, and tonight's very special guest, George Knapp. We're back to Hour 2 with the program, and I give you John Burroughs.
Thanks, Race. When we went to the break, Linda wanted to do a follow-up question. Go ahead, Linda.
Thanks, John. When you read, George, the 460-page UK Once Upon a Time restricted report that was unclassified very quietly and not for the public knowing in 2006, and that John and I and a few others got a copy of this in the last 2 or 3 years, related to John having the heart problem, having to have open heart surgery in order to survive, having some damage in an eye, and all of that coming because somebody in, we'll call it behind the matrix, knew about the unidentified aerial phenomena, what they call non-ionizing radiation, that, as one of the titles in this huge UAP report says, this radiation, this non-ionizing radiation, has mental effects on humans, and it details having to do with being able to manipulate minds so that humans see things that aren't there, or see things, hear things, have missing time. And one of the more interesting things about all of this scientific and technical report is that there is no specific definition of exactly what frequencies, beyond the fact that John Burroughs has been given some information that this unidentified aerial phenomena radiation described in this huge report is in the terahertz range. Now, when you go to an electromagnetic spectrum, and I've got one in front of me, and you come up from radio waves to microwaves, and you get to infrared next as you keep going up out of ionizing to ionizing radiation, which gets into the ultraviolet and X-rays and gamma. And that's really dangerous because that's where the radiation can strip off electrons from molecules. In the non-ionizing radiation, it can jiggle atoms and molecules, but it can't strip off the electrons and create ions. So now in that category of non-ionizing, when you get right to the very highest end on infrared, right next to microwave, this is the terahertz band. And the more I have done research about terahertz, the more I am finding scientists writing about it and addressing this. Could terahertz be used to wirelessly transfer huge files in the blink of an eye, detect bombs, poison gas clouds, concealed weapons from a far distance, peer through walls? In other words, something out of sci-fi where we could begin to look through walls in buildings and see everything from the outside with what they are calling T-ray vision. You can do all of this with terahertz technology if we could understand it, if we could control it, and that is the mystery and the surprise that the more I have studied, the more I find that this is truly a radiation that, quote unquote, does have some uniquely attractive qualities, but so much of it cannot be controlled. In all of the work in those 7 years on the Sherman Ranch, did you ever hear any of the physicists such as Eric Davis and Hal Puthoff and Kit and others, did they talk about terahertz radiation?
I should back up just a step and describe my role with these guys because Bob Bigelow and I have been friends for a long time. So he would confide things in me. He would trust me with information. He allowed me to interact with his staff, with Colum, with John Alexander, Eric Davis, and others. But I was only allowed into the Science Advisory Board meetings twice that I can remember. I made a presentation with him to him one time and sat in on part of another and before, because not everyone in there trusted me. I mean, it was more like, some of them were academics. They had reputations to consider. They didn't want their names out. There were 2 astronauts. There was a U.S. senator. There were people who did not want to be associated with this stuff in public. So there were limits to what I could have access to. I don't remember ever hearing that discussed specifically by that term, but I can tell you that games were played, that something along those lines, that kind of technology was employed at the ranch. There were radiation detectors that were employed many times on the property and many times which failed. Gyroscopes which would fail, cameras would fail. Whatever this thing was, it was able to manipulate technology to shut it down when it wanted to. There were things that were seen on the property only in the infrared spectrum that could not be seen with the human eye. There were things that dogs could see that were right there in front of the researchers that they could not see themselves. The animals that were with them were reacting. There were things that came out of the trees in the form of a big black cloud that took over the brain of one of the physicists who was on the property, spoke out of him using a different voice at one point. So there were indications of different kinds of technology used that were employing something on different parts of that spectrum that you're discussing. I'm not technical enough to be able to describe it, but I do know that the results of something like that were detected many times by the team during those 7 years.
Don't you find it fascinating, as long as you and I have been investigating various aspects of what we'll call the UAP UFO phenomena over the last 2 or 3 decades, that there would be this huge report? It implies a tremendous amount of baseline information about exposure to frequencies that can manipulate human minds, even has measurements, has scales and graphs about how far distant. For example, if you are 300 feet beyond the object that is emitting the UAP radiation, then you might not be affected. But from 300 feet to the object that is an unidentified aerial phenomena or UFO, there are, by distance, as you get closer, the amount of damage that can be done to tissue and manipulation of the brain increases.
Isn't that amazing how far we've come with that kind of specific? I mean, that's really specific. It's specific down to the yards. Somebody had to have some real hard data to come up with that. I'm just thinking back, Linda, to how far we've come. When I started this in 1987, I mean, it was like nuts and bolts saucers in the sky, visitors from other planets, mixed in with a little bit of disinformation and cover-up conspiracy theories by the government. And my first exposure to a much bigger, wider world of more mysterious other realities was you, as you were already working on this stuff, looking at cattle mutilations, but going far beyond that. And you helped me sort of change the whole paradigm that I was chasing after. And then Skinwalker Ranch sort of cemented that. But, man, we've come a long way where you got a government report that spells it out in that kind of specific detail that's released. Wow.
And you would think, George, that this is confirmation, that we have gone way past disclosure as even a question. This is confirmation in this 460-page report, and yet there is not human understanding of these frequencies and how they are applied in the technologies that they know that we're dealing with this unidentified aerial phenomena.
Well, I'm with you on that. And I'm in the same vein, you know, in all the work that you have done and others like you and some of the work that I've done, you know, we've always suspected that somewhere there's a big storehouse of information that someone understands this a lot better. And clearly the report you're talking about indicates that, but I'm still not convinced that anyone totally understands it. And I'm not sure that we ever will. Maybe it's beyond us. Maybe they gives us, it's like the title of one of your books, Glimpses of Other Realities, hoping that we get on a learning curve and get up to speed at some point. But it sounds like it's going to be a long-term process. It sure is fun chasing it. I know that.
Well, what is, from everything that you've been exposed to at Area 51, Bob Lazar, the Sherman Ranch, and very specific physical pieces of this phenomena, what is your own perspective on the RAF Bantwaters Woodbridge mystery from December 1980?
Well, I mean, I can tell you what it isn't. It wasn't the lighthouse.
Sure.
I mean, you know, it's amusing to see all the attempts to discredit that case, to shed light, to muddy the waters, all the contrary information and counter stories that get spliced in. Frankly, the people who do this stuff, who muddy the waters, who sow doubt, are better at their job, I think, than we are, Linda. They've had a lot of practice at it. They've gotten good at it over the years on the way to cast doubt on a good case. Like the guy in Arizona, Snowflake, Arizona, or the guy who was Ed Walters down there in Gulf Breeze, who was seeing crafts and taking amazing photos. All those good cases find a way to be discredited. Bentwaters may be the most important case of all time, the best documented case in the minds of the public, is still a great big question mark. It has its adherents, but clearly this was an intrusion by advanced technology way beyond anything that humans have, from some other reality, from the future, from another dimension, from another planet. I don't know that we have enough information to answer it definitively, but it was a non-human intelligence far in advance of anything that we have that intruded into our reality in a very physical way. And I don't think there's any question about it. I'm amazed that this report that you're talking about was released. I'm amazed that it has such specific detail because it, as you said, it seems to be confirmation without actually calling it confirmation.
That's right. And John has had experiences with blue lights that may or may not be exactly in the same category of what was happening on the Sherman Ranch, those strange blue glowing lights. But John, I wonder, because it seems so relevant right now, could you explain what the impact of those blue lights have had on you since December 26th, 1980, and why you even wanted them around you in the Phenomenon Radio banner.
I mean, that's what tonight was important, and I hope people really stop and listen, because I believe there's not, probably as of now, the information we have, there's not a definitive answer. Does the government have a better idea? I would say they probably do, just based on the fact that they're not going to share certain technology with people. But ultimately, a lot of these incidents, including Skinwalker, the blue orbs seem to play a part in all this. And I was going to ask you, George, what was the most definitive? I know different things happen. There was different things all the time, but how often were these blue lights or orbs involved in all of this?
Maybe a dozen times, a dozen different stories that I had heard. There was a specific, distinct period. I don't remember the NIDS guys ever seeing the blue ones. They saw the white ones and they saw the red ones, but the blue ones were seen by the Sherman family, and I don't recall a report from the NIDS guys that they had seen any themselves. So there was just a period of a couple of months where they popped up, as far as I can remember.
And John, can you explain, John, what happened that you at least can remember from the hypnosis session?
Well, before I do that, you said that one of the physicists had an interaction with something and they actually spoke, right?
Yeah.
What exactly was he interacting with?
This thing appeared to them as a big black cloud. It was floating in the trees in that middle homestead, the same place where they stuck my chair. And the two guys were walking along. Colin was one of them. The other guy is a PhD, and he's walking behind, and they had dogs. And all of a sudden, the dog stopped and started whimpering and hid behind him, and this black cloud got really big in front of him. And then the second guy was frozen, and he started speaking in a language, a voice that wasn't his. It said something to the effect of, "We're watching you. You're not welcome here." And that same guy had residual effects for days. After a couple of minutes, he snapped out of it, didn't remember what had happened, but he had residual effects for days, really bad dreams, couldn't sleep. There were lingering effects messing with his head.
Did they check him out physically afterwards?
Yeah, but I'm sure they did. I know they did, and I know that he's okay now, but and that it's gone away. It's not still with him. But I couldn't tell you what any medical report said then. I did not have access to that.
Okay, now my next question, which will feed into maybe what Linda wants me to comment on. Different people, when they were out in the forest over the 3 nights, saw different things. You know, Jim said he saw a triangular object. There was clearly blue lights. One of the individuals out there said he saw possibly something inside of the blue light that looked like an entity or something like that. But the thing that I remember was the big orangish ball or orb or whatever you want to call it that had a hue around it and different colored lights, including the predominant ones, blue and white. Was there any one thing, I know you said the blue lights up here, but was there any one thing that occurred or happened to these people when they saw it that happened more than once? And getting into that, when they looked at this, did they ever think it had something to do with manipulation itself, time manipulation, or it was trying to make them think they saw something differently than what they were really seeing?
I can't think of an incident like that. I do know 2 specific incidences where the blue orbs appeared and the effects were the same. There was one instance where it appeared over the head of a horse, and the horse just went crazy, just stampeding and just like it had been injected with drugs or something, crazy out of its mind. The other time it happened was when it appeared over the rancher and his wife, and it drove them right to their knees with fear beyond anything that they could imagine. There were other times when the blue orbs were in the vicinity where they would hear voices coming out of the sky, just voices out of nowhere, speaking in a language that they didn't understand, sort of mocking them. But that's as close as I can get.
Did anything change shape? Like, in other words, they saw it as one thing at first and it changed into something else?
Oh, I think there were incidents where somebody could see the two people looking at the same thing, seeing different things. Even it's completely separate from the ranch, but Lazar even described that kind of phenomena where saucers that were out at Papoose Lake, he would say that you could be in one spot looking at it and not see anything, and 5 feet away you're seeing a saucer floating above a dry lake bed. There was manipulation of imagery at the property. And as I said, sometimes it was just gamesmanship. It was just theatrical. There was one case, I haven't even talked about this yet. The rancher was away from town. He was at some cattle convention. His wife comes up to the property. She opens up the gate. And as she's opening the gate and going to get back in her car, out comes a big wolf, like the one that they had shot on the first day. And it's accompanied by this gigantic, oversized dog with a tiny head, strange traveling companion. She jumps back in her car, races, goes to the house, jumps in and closes the drapes and locks the doors. Pretty soon she hears a noise and sees some lights out on the pasture right outside the ranch house. She cracks open the window to look and see what's going on, and a spaceship had landed right on the property there, 25 yards or so from the house. And it had landed, and it was almost like shaped like an office, and there was a desk in the middle of it, a big hole, lights pouring out of this well-lit interior room, and a desk in the middle of it. And after a minute or so, this big Darth Vader-type character walks up to the desk and sits down and looks right at her. She closes the window and is terrified. And in a while, she calls her husband, says, "You got to get home. This thing is out here. I'm really worried." He drives all night, gets home. The thing is gone. It's gone in the morning. But he goes out to look where it was. There's indentations where a craft had been sitting, and great big boot prints, like a Darth Vader boot print, left in the property. What is the purpose of that? What is that other than theatrics, other than a performance, other than to scare people and get a reaction? So there's all kinds of stuff that makes absolutely no sense, that never happened a second time. So if you're looking for a pattern from those blue orbs or all I can give you is that they scared the crap out of people.
Now, when they scared the crap out of people, in what way? Because, there's different things. You can feel like you're physically being assaulted, or you can just feel like there's something there that, could assault you. So did they feel like something was done to them, or did they just feel like something could be done to them?
Something could be done to them. The fear was beyond rational, as I described it. It made no sense, and they didn't understand why they were so scared, why they were shivering and on their knees, but they were. In all the time that they were there, the 20 months that they persevered, there was no physical harm to them. That was the only thing that ever happened, and I'm not sure if we even put this in the book, but there were tiny scoop marks taken out of Terry and Gwen's hands in the same spot on the same night, like the kind of scoop marks that some abductees report over the years. But that was the only physical harm that ever happened to them. The only other harm was psychological, and they were, as I described earlier, they were messed up by the time the NIDS guys got there.
And
what's that? I'm sorry.
In your chapter, Orbs, here, just briefly, John, to address the depth of this hair trigger fear that these blue orbs cause. Sherman watched in amazement as these near bubbling incandescent blue fluid objects were moving around in front of him and his wife. He could hear a faint crackling sound from the object, like static electricity sometimes makes. As he was watching this amazing spectacle of these blue glass-like objects moving in front, the hair on the back of his neck rose, and they mean specifically, this is not a figure of speech, it rose. He could feel a wave of deep, naked fear washing over him. He felt paralyzed with the deepest, most visceral fear that he had ever known. It was overwhelming. And it goes on, it affects his wife, and she sinks to her knees on the ground. He is so weak, he feels as if he cannot move at all, whether it was muscles that were being controlled from the outside. And here's the important part. It was like a switch had been abruptly thrown. That, George and John, was also the description by John Keel when he was investigating the Mothmen. And in his book about the Mothmen, and I talked with John Keel about this before he died, He was walking on a sidewalk. It was in the town, having to do with all of the Mothman events that were happening. He was walking on a sidewalk, and his right leg went forward just in a normal walk, and he was suddenly hit with a bolt of adrenaline, fear, as if he had to go down to the ground. And John Keel was shocked, but in enough control, he said he stopped, and then he went backwards, because he was so used to looking at phenomena as being manipulative. So then he walked backwards, walked forwards, the same exact place in the sidewalk. As soon as he put his right leg forward, he was hit with a bolt of adrenaline and fear. And John told me that he did this half a dozen times, demonstrating to himself, this has to be technology. This is some sort of a wall that is made to impact with the human mind and cause abject terror.
I'll give you one other story about the blue meanies that I called them, that I had forgotten about. But it was the rancher was on the phone. It was one evening. I think he was talking to Bigelow at the time. And one of these blue orbs had appeared, and his dogs, he had these 3 big, tough country dogs that were trying to snap at this thing and try to catch it. And this blue orb would just tantalizingly get close to him, and then they'd jump up and try to get it, and they'd move out of the range of its jaws. And it was leading them out across the pasture, back in the direction of where the wolf had appeared from. And the rancher saying, hey, something's going on here. I think I better get off the phone. And as he just tried to end the conversation, the 3 dogs and the blue orb disappeared into the brush. And then he hears these shrieks, these horrible noises from the animals. And when he went to investigate, I think he didn't go until the next morning. He went to investigate, and there were 3 greasy spots, just a couple of hairs, was all that was left of these dogs. This was technology. I think it goes along with what Linda's saying. It's technology of some sort.
Right.
And it seemed to be overly theatrical and meant to frighten people.
Right.
And with that, we are just approaching the final segment of Phenomenon Radio here tonight with our very special guest, George Knapp. Stay tuned, folks.
Find the podcast on Spotify, iHeart, Audible, and Apple Podcast. Get the best on the X.
Welcome back to Phenomenon Radio for the final segment. I'm here with John Burroughs, Linda Moulton Howe, and our very special guest, George Knapp. John, it's all yours.
George, before I go into my hypnosis, earlier on you talked about Bob Lazar in Area 51, and you talked about a couple of different craft doing different things. I take it that was our technology that we were working on?
No, I don't think so. Bob didn't think so. He wasn't positive, but what he had read in reports is that we got this from somewhere else, and the way he described it was his job was to try to help him take it apart to figure out how it worked and how it could be replicated using Earth material. So strong suggestion that it came from somewhere else. It was ours because it was in our possession, but it was not something that we had made.
Okay, so it wasn't something we had developed and we're working on. It was some technology that we have gotten our hands on, and it through the shape of a craft or a disc, correct?
Right.
When we go into Condyne, some of the things that you guys were talking about before we went to break, about indentations in the ground and stuff like that, that is all in Condyne. Now, the interesting thing about Condyne is the report's out, but a lot of it's still classified. And to even go deeper into that, a lot of it appears to be classified that it was stuff that was gleaned from American intelligence. So when you look at Condyne and you looked at the stuff that's still redacted, you look at the fact that the MOD now had to admit that they're still holding 18 files, including policy files. What do you think? I mean, one of the things in Condyne, it clearly says there's a race by the different countries to get this technology. Do you believe that's possibly why they're holding back what they're holding back from everybody?
It's entirely possible. I mean, I think it's probably the most likely explanation is that the technology is something they want to keep to themselves, figure out how it works, figure out how to master it, and use it when the time comes. The thing is, though, we've had some of this stuff for a long time. If the witnesses are to be believed, if documents are to be believed, and they don't seem to be any closer to any kind of disclosure or coming clean about it. And if they're using this technology, we rarely get glimpses of that as well. So I say this to friends of mine who want disclosure, for example. They want the president to go on television and say, yeah, we've been lying to you. Anything short of the president announcing something on the evening newscast or in a news conference and saying, yeah, we're lying. We've got flying saucers. Aliens are here. Thank you and good night. They're not going to, anything less than that, they're not going to settle for it. Well, that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It would make no political sense for it to do. It would ruin the presidency of whoever makes that kind of an announcement. And I'm not sure that the president even has that kind of information. My suspicion is that whatever technology exists has been taken out of the government sector. They don't want people like Linda or I chasing around trying to use Freedom of Information Act to get access to information that's in government files. It's been put in private hands or foreign hands or somebody's hands that's far removed from prying eyes like journalists or Congress or whatever. There's not going to be any disclosure for a variety of reasons, but that doesn't mean there can't be confirmation, and we can talk about that if you want.
Sure, I'd love to hear a little bit more about confirmation because Bob Bigelow went into that with you on your interview. He believes, or actually, why don't you explain what he believes as far as confirmation over disclosure?
Well, it was an amazing interview. I mean, he wanted to do it, and he knew that I was going to ask and get into the whole disclosure discussion because it was a hot topic at the time. Linda, maybe you remember what the date was. It was a year or so ago.
That's right. It was in I think, June 13th, something like that, a year ago.
Bob came on. We talked a little bit about his space program and that effort, and then we got into disclosure, and he agrees that it's not going to happen. Somewhere along the line, something happened to Bob, though, and he learned something. Now, you recall when I first knew him and when Linda's known him, he's a billionaire. He's a man with considerable resources who marshaled those resources to try to get some answers to really big questions. In the middle of that, though, he developed his own idea for a space program. He's sunk about $300 million into Bigelow Aerospace, building these expandable space habitats. He's become a key cog for NASA. Everything that's going to happen in the privatization of space, the commercial development of space, now has to go through Bigelow, which is a key place to be. And I suspect he travels in circles that are different from what he used to travel in. Used to be, he was a billionaire on the outside with a panel of experts trying to get some answers to things he suspected. At some point, I think he has stopped asking. And I suspect it's because, I don't want to speak for him, but I suspect he has at least answered it in his mind. So in the course of this interview, he said, look, disclosure is not going to happen, but confirmation trumps disclosure. He thinks the information that is already in the public realm, in the public arena, establishes confirmation that this is a non-human intelligence intervening in our world, and that the evidence is overwhelming. What more do we need? And he thinks that governments around the world know it and have accepted it, even if they don't completely understand it, that it's that the holy grail of finding the Roswell wreckage or something is not going to happen, that it probably, whatever technology exists, is deep black and is not going to be released. We need to get over it. We need to get on to understanding what it is and how we interact with it, as opposed to trying to find the hidden documents or the hangar that has the saucers or anything along those lines.
And George, there is the gigantic story behind the question, what are the agendas? Positive, negative, how many different types? Because that's what comes up in the human abduction syndrome.
I don't think anybody knows for sure. I think it's probably a mix, don't you, Linda? I mean, you get different kinds of reports, different reactions from different people. Some abductees and contactees who are so blessed that they interacted with our space brethren and whose lives are changed in a positive way. They get psychic powers. Their ailments are healed. They want to save humanity. It's a very positive experience. Others, for whom it is a very dark experience. They're abducted, the specimens are taken, there's some kind of a hybrid race being developed, there's an agenda that is not shared with us, it's cruel and brusque treatment and not friendly at all, and it sends them into a funk that lasts the rest of their lives. So it may be several agendas, not just one, and it may be several different visitors from different places, not just one.
And has Bob ever talked with you about any of that in relationship to it's already confirmed that we're not alone in the universe?
not that I can share. I mean, some stuff that we have conversations that are private, and I don't mean to be mysterious about that, but I don't want to go too far in saying stuff that I think I'm attributing to a radio interview as opposed to things that he confided in me. So nothing comes to mind that I can share at this point. I don't think that Bob really knows the answer to that one. I can say that much.
But no question that we have other intelligences and alien presence and have been back engineering non-human technologies.
No question, as far as I know. I mean, Bob is beyond that. I mean, and the proof is in the pudding. His lifelong interest in pursuing paranormal mysteries is pretty much over. He's devoting all of his resources to Bigelow Aerospace. He's on the hot seat right now. Sometime this year, if SpaceX can get its act together, the first Bigelow space habitat will go up and be attached to the ISS. It could be the dawn of a new era for space exploration, commercial development of space. His energies are devoted entirely to that, and no more energies to the ranch, UFOs, any of that stuff. It makes it seem like whatever answers he was seeking, he's got, and now he can go on to other things.
And in that discussion you had with him, am I correct in understanding that he has a contract with NASA in which he now has legal right as Bigelow Aerospace to develop at the Lagrange points between the moon and the Earth some territory on the moon and some territory on Mars?
Well, he has a contract with NASA that's multifaceted. One part of it is just deals with the habitat that's going to the ISS. Another part of that agreement makes him sort of the hub of the wheel, in that anything that deals with the commercial development of space has to go through him. He coordinates all of it. Thirdly, I know that he has negotiated with NASA and with other entities regarding legal rights to up there. I think they have an understanding, but I don't know that for fact that they have a contract to that regard. I don't know if it goes that far.
John, can you share with people now what you do remember about the blue lights at Bentwaters?
Well, most of what I remember came out under hypnosis, but it goes into the fact of what happened up in Skinwalker, as far as there was clearly some kind of a telepathic communication. They clearly were in control. They were in charge of it. That was what we were really looking at, not like a craft or something. And I wouldn't say, like last week John Alexander used the word trickster. I don't think they were out there doing that to us, but it was clear because there was indentations left in the ground and stuff like that, which Condign talks about. But there was enough evidence left over to show something happened, but not enough to prove it, exactly what it was and where it came from. And, I think that if Mr. Bigelow figured this out, I mean, good for him, and he's moving forward. But there's so many people out there that have had some kind of interaction or feel like we're not alone and are so desperately searching for answers. They need somebody to step up to the plate. And if it can't be him, somebody else, and start, doing the proper work and putting this all together, because Condine's a piece of it. There's other stuff out there that's involved in this. So we got this box like a jigsaw puzzle, but we don't have the puzzle put together yet. And, I'd like to think, George, who do you think out there could take that over then if Mr. Bigelow has no more interest in that?
I don't have the slightest idea. It takes a lot of money to do it. This is expensive stuff. I can't imagine what he has spent just on security at the ranch. Since the book came out, it's been overrun by drunks and partiers and vandals and people who steal stuff for souvenirs, and it's just a mess. So he's had security 24/7 there for the last several years. That property, it's like, who do you convince to pick up the mantle? The Skinwalker Ranch that was like somebody ordered the weirdest pizza with everything on it. You got UFOs and Sasquatch-type creatures and balls of light and animal mutilations and poltergeists and crop circles. We didn't even talk about the poltergeist activity, which, if this is some sort of technology, How and why is it being used this way? I mean, the rancher, the strangest stuff, the scariest stuff to me that happened on the ranch, it wasn't about aliens or UFOs or Bigfoot. It was about this poltergeist stuff that would happen. The wife, the ranch wife, takes a shower every morning. She goes in, locks the door, puts her hairbrush and a towel on the cabinet, gets in the shower, gets out, and the cabinet the towel and the brush are gone. She finds them later in the freezer in the kitchen. The door's still locked. Or, the rancher's out. He's digging a hole for a post for some fencing. He's using a post hole digger, a big, heavy piece of equipment. He stops, wipes his brow, takes a drink of water, turns around, and the post hole digger is gone. It's disappeared, vanished in front of his eyes. They find it 2 weeks later, 75 feet up in a cottonwood tree. Things would move around on their own. Clothing and tools and appliances would develop, disappear, and then turn up in the strangest places. I mean, what kind of gamesmanship is that? If it's technology or a military PSYOPs program, who's the Delta Force soldier who goes in and steals the towel and the hairbrush while the door is locked? And who mutilates a cow in broad daylight when nobody see it happening?
And doing it in the book, you stressed it was so important that they had been with that very healthy animal, and 20 minutes later, they had walked on. It was dead, bloodless. The excisions were perfect, and it had all happened, and they knew in 20 minutes, Mr. Sherman and his son.
Yeah, it's multiple agendas, maybe multiple kinds of visitors, with all kinds of different games that they're playing. Some of them may be serious, some of them impish and not so serious. And trying to find somebody like Bob Bigelow or a government who's willing to look beyond the ridicule factor and take this on, I don't know who that would be. It's almost made to look so ridiculous that no one will touch it. And that might be where the challenge is, and maybe where the hint is. Challenging us to look beyond the obvious.
And yet we've got centuries of the mythologies of other things in the sky interacting with humans and evolution. And one of the pieces that, since I was able to listen to and watch John Burroughs under several different hypnosis sessions, that just to add this one piece in this discussion, when John would be getting closer and closer to something that may have been a black hole in a craft, we're not certain. But it was always, George, it was always blue lights. He would say, they won't let me, over and over again. The blue lights won't let me. They won't let me. And the implication was they wouldn't let him go, or they wouldn't let him go forward in the hypnosis. That's the part we're not sure. But the blue lights had control over John Burroughs' mind. And that is also a parallel of those blue lights having instantaneous control over Terry and his wife, because they said it was like a switch and they went into terror. So from everything that you have investigated, George, if you were trying to say we can introduce all of this to the public because it needs to be out, this is a big truth, and you put it in the context of millennia of stories about star people and the various Indian Vimanas and all of the drawings that have been in old historic documents. And you say to the public, this has been going on on this planet for a very long time. There is a presence that is not human. How would you explain an agenda that affected humans with fear and mutilations and human abductions? How would you get that out to the public?
Well, I guess you'd parse it out in little pieces, which is the way it's been happening for a while now. I don't know that you can lay out the case to the broader public and expect them to understand it or accept it. just in dealing with the ranch, for example, this range of activity, so much strange stuff. Some of it seems like you associate it with ETs, flying saucers, some of it with poltergeists, some of it with dimensional creatures or time travelers or monsters. It's really hard to swallow all that stuff. And it seems to be by design. I mean, you look at it over and over, and it seems to be challenging us, our paradigms, and our understanding of reality on every level. And maybe that's what it is. I know that in this discussions of disclosure, people will tell me at conferences and stuff, I'm ready. I'm ready to know the truth. Everybody I know is ready to learn the truth. And I want to say to them, are you sure? Because you're ready for one certain kind of truth. You want to be told that aliens from other planets are visiting us. But as Jacques Vallée told me when I first started this stuff, look, I'm going to be really disappointed if the ultimate answer to this mystery is other visitors from other planets flying here in spaceships to visit and take samples. The ultimate truth is much more mysterious and wondrous. Reality isn't what it used to be. And this seems to be trying to tell us that our flimsy grasp of reality really is even flimsier than we can imagine. People might be ready for one kind of disclosure. Are they ready to learn that humanity is one tiny piece of reality, that we are ensconced in a much bigger, much more complicated reality that we can't even get our heads around, that there are other intelligences much greater than ourselves who interact with us for a variety of different reasons, who probably many of them don't care what happens to us. We're ants to them. Some of them that like to just mess with us just for the heck of it. Some of them that may have an interest in our ultimate development and want to help us understand it and lead us to a better place. But multiple agendas, a much bigger reality, they can intervene in our world anytime they want, and there's nothing we can do about it. They can see us when we're sleeping, when we're in the shower. They can read our minds. They can manipulate our emotions. That kind of disclosure, people are not ready for. And so I don't know how to get that message out. You can only everybody do their part, dig into it, tell what you know, and some people will catch on to it, and then some people will ignore it.
And George, is that why we have a secret space program?
Probably.
And in that secret space program, do you think that we already are underground on Mars?
I don't know about that. I don't know. I mean, some people who have come forward with bits and pieces of information suggest we can do amazing things, that we're far, far ahead of what's been acknowledged. And I don't have a problem in believing some of that. I don't know about Mars. I don't have anything solid on that. I do believe that there is a secret space program. I've been told that there is one.
Right.
And that, I suspect that it's very mundane sort of reasons why we're kept in the dark about some of it. And that's just power, the same kind of power games that our government and intelligence agencies have played for a very long time.
Well, in your discussions with Bob Bigelow about this crossroads that he is now holding as we go forward with, we'll call it the public space program, have you ever talked with him about some of the statements that people have made to you, me, and others about the secret space program, and that we are way advanced over what the public knows?
I'll give you this answer because it is something he said in public. And I asked him directly whether he thinks there is a secret space program, and he said yes. And I asked him to elaborate, and he would not. If there's anybody who knows, it's Bob. Mm-hmm. He said yes, and I believe him.
And then, on the other side of that question, are we coping with military operations in space? And is it because our government, going back to World War II and what has been suggested from the Ronald Reagan administration, was that Reagan was given a briefing by CIA and DIA and NSA on the extraterrestrial biological entities. Those phrases were used allegedly with him. And they outlined 5 different types, 4 of which were not considered to be a problem. One, they said, They called it a hostile alien visitor. And if our government has been dividing non-humans into hostile alien visitors and those that were not hostile, then is this the secret space program literally designed to have space war with something that is considered to be an enemy?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. I suspect that it could be designed to defend our country against whatever the enemy challenge might be, whether it's the Chinese or the Russians or something else. It might work for all of the above. I've read those accounts of supposed briefing with Reagan and wondered to myself, if I were the keeper of the secret, which, if any, presidents would I trust with it? And I suppose the military-industrial complex being what it is, they would cross all the Democrats off the list. And probably the guy I would trust if I were them probably would have been Nixon. And maybe Reagan. Reagan certainly made enough public statements about UFOs and a threat from above that it seemed to be tantalizing hints that there's a greater truth that he was allowing us a glimpse of. I don't have trouble believing that. I suspect Obama certainly wouldn't be read into that. Bill Clinton, for all the statements that he's made about UFOs and Area 51 and aliens and things of that sort, he certainly tried to find out, as Jimmy Carter did, and I think both of them were thwarted.
And if 4 on that list of 5 are considered not a threat, then maybe humanity has an ally no matter what else is out there, and that at this point, you, I, and others, that I think, George, don't you feel it is way past time that all of the public was told at least some of the truth?
Oh, I'm with you on it. I'm a First Amendment guy. That's what I do for a living. I toil in the vineyard of the First Amendment every day, working day of my life. So if there is truth to be told, I'd like to hear it. I just go back to the idea that there might be some truths that really are a little hard to handle, that are way beyond what we can get our heads around right now, and which might actually cause a heck of a lot of turmoil and social disruption, the kind of stuff that that RAND study or that study a long time ago had predicted, when we might encounter a higher intelligence, extraterrestrials, whatever. I am for disclosure. I just don't think it'll happen. And while I do think the truth should be told, I not only don't think it will happen, but I'm not sure it's a good idea, depending on what the truth turns out to be.
Well, on that note, George Knapp, thank you so much for this fascinating discussion today. Next week, we are going to pick up exactly that question with Steve Bassett and one of the congressmen from the citizen hearing. And I hope that you and others will look at Phenomenon Radio as one of the crossroads that we are trying to bring facts and move the ball forward a little bit in terms of what those facts are in relationship to us not being alone in this universe.
I'll help you any way I can. Linda, always great to talk to you. John, thanks very much.
Thanks for coming on, George. With that, Race, take us forward in time to next week.
Thanks for joining us, everyone, tonight for Phenomenon Radio. For John Burroughs, Linda Moulton-Howe, and our very special and honored guest, George Knapp, thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. We'll see you next week.